Hello, I'm Thomas at Art and Lit Matters. On May 13th of 1879, my favorite poet, Gerard Manley Hopkins, went out for an afternoon walk, as he frequently did, only to discover this time that his favorite grove of poplar trees had been cut down to the ground. Upon returning, he wrote a poem about the event. Boring subject, right? I don't think so, because the poem, Binsey Poplars, is anything but a lament about a lost grove of trees. Who needs that? Instead, it is a profound and century ahead of its time expression of an ecological consciousness that understands stewardship from the inside out and explores the depths and complexity of our true relation to the natural world we inhabit. It is so far ahead of its time that it has more in common with writers of the 1960s and 70s like Gary Snyder or Robert Bly, or more recently, poems by Jory Graham or Mary Oliver. At any rate, I will read the poem and then take it apart line by line. Binsey Poplars by Gerard Manley Hopkins. My aspens dear, whose airy cages quelled or quenched in leaves the leaping sun, all felled are all felled of a fresh and following folded rank, not spared, not one that dandled a sandaled shadow that swam or sank over meadow or river or wind wandering weed winding bank. Oh, if we but knew what we do when we delve and hew, hack, and rack the growing green, since country is so tender to touch, her being so slender that like this sleek and seeing ball, but a prick will make no eye at all, where we mean to mend her, we end her when we hew and delve. Aftercomers cannot guess the beauty been. 10 or 12 strokes of havoc unselve the sweet, a special scene, a rural scene, sweet, a special rural scene. Let's see how we can open this poem up and dive into it a bit with a line-by-line analysis. The first thing we encounter after the title is the two words felled, 1879, standing out like a gravestone epitaph. Stark, minimal, serious, final. And in terms of the sound of the poem, keep that elegiacally used word felled in your mind. First three lines. My aspens dear, whose airy cages quelled or quenched in leaves the leaping sun, all felled, are all felled. On a hot summer day, there's something so completely refreshing about the shade of the tree. The leaping sun is a hot and burning sun, and it's by the canopy of the aspen's foliage, quelled, or quenched in leaves, that we have respite from that sun. But it's also the leaping sun upon leaves that creates and sustains the life and growth and thriving of the tree, light transfigured into life and into new life. In a sense, our shade is the life of the tree. And Hopkins doesn't so much describe as present this, drawing us into the quenching shade from the leaping sun while simultaneously piercing us with a musical litany of the tolling funeral bell. Felled in 1879, quelled or quenched, all felled are all felled. Do you hear the dark ringing? Onomatopoeia describes words that sound like they mean. Bell is a perfect example. In this elegiacal poem, the bells start ringing early. of a fresh and following folded rank. The word fresh is so resonant with new life. In his poem, God's Grandeur, Hopkins had written, "There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. Fresh is a springing into life." And the trees in a line of a fresh and following folded rank, it's so vivid. But are they really still standing, still proud? No, not spared, not one. The starkness of not spared, not one underscores the now bare landscape, the absolute loss. They're gone. And the repetition of not in not spared, not one makes us feel our way into that strange word not. Think for a moment about how we react to the deliberate repetition of a single word in any single line of a poem and what it does for us. For one thing, it calls attention to the word as a word in itself and calls attention as well to that word as sound with its particular sound meaning and opens us up a little to a sort of meditative playing with the resonances of that word. Not is such a loaded and darkly resonant word. The most psychologically apocalyptic line I've read in my entire life is Macbeth's "Nothing is but what is not." And both in that line and here in Hopkins' poem with the doubling of not, I hear a trace of the ghostly echo of not's homonym, that naught of absence in its one-time common use for zero. And reflecting again on the doubling of the poem's not, I hear as well a shadowing of not in the sense of to tie a knot that constricts or binds us or perplexes us. And the absence of the aspen trees could be just seen as a void, except for the fact that Hopkins relentlessly interrogates the larger meaning of absence of the aspen trees for us and for society, exploring a not as zero and void and a not as a perplexing bind. There's something much bigger at stake here in the poem than a tree hugger humming Joni Mitchell's fabulous song, "They took all the trees and put them in a tree museum, and don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot." Something much bigger, a terribly perplexing zero void of naught, as intricate as a knotted conundrum of loss, lurks in and beneath that stark phrase, "not spared, not one." But not one also functions as a sort of enjambment carrying over into the next lines. Not one that dandled a sandaled shadow that swam or sank on meadow and river and wind wandering weed winding bank. And suddenly, in that image, we are back both to the thisness or the inscape or the nature of the sun sheltering tree. And we are also simultaneously by the water in the shade, looking at the play of light and shadow as the leaves dance in the wind overhead. That dandled a sandaled shadow that swam or sank on meadow and river and wind wandering weed winding bank. It takes us almost bodily right to the riverbank. He's so precise. Hopkins' observational skills are that of the natural scientist. Can you feel it? The immersive tug into the gorgeous fecundity of riverbank and trees and the shadows of the leaves at play on the surface and upon the bottom of the stream. Shadows that swam or sank. And we've all been there. It's the reason we're enchanted by streams, the play of light and shadow from the wind dancing leaves. Again, Hopkins not so much describes as presents, drawing us bodily there. And the fabulous sounds of the words have their own seductive and hypnotic allure. that dandled, a sandaled shadow that swam or sank on meadow and river and wind-wandering, weed-winding bank. It is a sound cluster that draws us onward, just as the river, with the sound of the last clause winding just as a river winds. We think of single words as onomatopoetic, mimicking the sound of what they mean, like the word bell or buzz. But Hopkins is so full of onomatopoetic phrases, sentences that mirror with sound the semantic sense of the words. Remember how earlier I spoke of the litany of ringing sounds as piercing, and that might have sounded extreme, but I'm sticking to it because piercing is right for sound that is used well in a poem. For sound, after all, is different from sight and is physically penetrative, vibrations that literally spill into our bodies on meadow and river and wind-wandering, weed-winding bank. One of the absolutely core but under-discussed magical things about poetry is the way it is experienced with the body as much as the mind. And Hopkins is a master of chiming our internal physiology, creating an experience of worlds far beyond mere cognition. And poetry, like music, intrinsically heals the mind-body split. At this precise moment of maximum immersion and fusion of sound and sense into the pleasures of the shade-giving trees along the side of the river, the vision vanishes, and again we have the blank of no trees, no leaves, no respite from the leaping sun. And what do we have? Oh, if we but knew what we do when we delve or hew, hack, and rack the growing green. Hopkins suggests that both as individuals and collectively, we really don't understand what we are doing with nature or understand the consequences of our willful blindness. Willful because we all want progress, affluence, the splendor of cities, all things that can fuel a destruction of the natural world. If you look at the music or sound sense of this passage, oh, if we but knew what we do when we delve or hew, it's so smooth and gentle, knit together by the recurring ooh sounds fitting the calm, serious, lamenting, slightly interrogative assertion. But then we get to hack and rack the growing green, set off by the auditory smoothness of if we but knew what we do when we delve and hew. Hack and rack comes like an invasive bit of auditory violence. The two rhyming plosives, hack and rack, together sound like some violating, mechanized or technologized factory sound. When I recited the poem for the video, my unplanned pronunciation of hack and rack seemed so plosive and guttural and really unpleasant to me, I nearly re-recorded the poem. But upon reflection, the extreme contrast of the urban industrial sound of hack and rack with the smooth sound of, oh, if we but knew what we do when we delve and hew is entirely intentional. For keep in mind, this is 1879, and we are in the thick of the industrial age, where trees by the millions are being felled in the name of industry and progress and cities. Ask yourself, what is the music of the Industrial Revolution, the early factory or assembly line? Hack and rack, hack and rack, hack and rack. It is like a 3-word sound poem of the invasive cacophony of modernity. And the complete phrase, hack and rack the growing green, in 5 words, that's half of what the Industrial Revolution actually did in its move from rural agriculture to urban manufacturing. And Gerard Manley Hopkins is just asking us to take a close look at the consequences. And then we have the really wonderful conceit of the needle in the eyeball. Nature is vulnerable. How vulnerable? as vulnerable as our very eyes, which, if we're blessed to have sight, we so depend on, and yet our eyes are so vulnerable that a single prick of a needle would end eyesight forever. Perhaps nature itself, in its natural balance, is that vulnerable. Since country is so tender to touch, her being so slender that like this sleek and seeing ball, but a prick will make no eye at all. In this poem about human blindness to the consequences of our action, every single time I read of the sleek and seeing ball, I of course think of a human eyeball and our unceasing vulnerability to human-created problems. For Hopkins is saying that nature itself, and really our world, is as vulnerable as an eyeball before a needle, but a prick will make no eye at all. And this is a total aside, but when I read of the sleek and seeing ball in the context of absolute vulnerability, I always flash in my mind on that great blue ball in the sky, our Earth, as captured in the 1968 Apollo mission photograph. And I only mention that global view because what's at stake in this poem is really our relationship to nature and the earth itself, and not just a grove of aspen trees. And now comes a truly amazing line that in a way leaves the ecological consciousness of Henry David Thoreau or John Muir a bit in the dust. Where we, even where we mean to mend her, we end her. One would have to be living in a bubble not to realize right now in our real world we daily pay a price for human intervention in life cycles and natural regulatory systems of our planet. Where we, even where we mean to mend her, we end her. Isn't that a bit of a proleptic or way before its time 1879 whisper into our real world and ears of 2025? When we hew and delve, aftercomers cannot guess the beauty bin. And here, the destruction of the grove of aspen trees is again a whisper right into our present lives, for it is you and me standing riverside, beholding not a grove of trees, but a field or a parking lot. And for us, the aftercomers, the trees aren't simply gone. They never existed. It's in the nature of an aftercomer, then we cannot guess the beauty bin. For us, it is if the aspen trees were never there. They not only cut down the trees, but cut down the future. And the poem closes with this: 10 or 12, only 10 or 12 strokes of havoc unselve the sweet, a special scene, rural scene, a rural scene, sweet, a special rural scene. Let's take one small step back. Sometimes you can think of a single word as a poem in itself, a kind of living, evolving combination of all its different definitions, all its accumulated connotations, all its slang usages and senses, and all its remembered instances of extraordinary usages in living language. And perhaps most interestingly, the preserved traces of the winding etymological history of the word, and then add to that the sound sense of the word, and these things are preserved, however faintly, in the words we hear and use, and especially the words we feel our ways into. Don't believe me? Think of the word havoc as in 10 or 12, only 10 or 12 strokes of havoc unselve, and reflect upon how much mayhem and chaos and destruction and loss is preserved in that one single word, havoc. It's a strong word, strong in sound, and intuitively we know it's powerful because it feels powerful. It's even more than destruction or mayhem. Havoc is an unmaking of the world. Chaos is come. Havoc. Part of this power derives from the etymology or history of the word. When havoc was first used, it was a cry after battle to signal it was time for looting and pillaging and revenge and words I can't even say on YouTube. 10 or 12, only 10 or 12 strokes of havoc, unselve. Now, look at the word unselve. It's another gem. To unselve is to denature our very identity, to unmake us, to unmake our very selves, or to unmake the grove of aspen trees by the side of a winding river when none of us can know the cost. If you watch other videos in the series on Hopkins, you will come to see over time how the notion of self for Hopkins as simultaneously thing and action, noun and verb, was so dear to the poet. The core, the thisness, the inward lineaments and truth of the thing, the inscape of the thing, the core individuating action, the selving of our being. The verbal sense of unself for Hopkins is a destruction of all of this, a destruction of the inscape and verbal selving core of the truth of the thing. 10 or 12 strokes of havoc, unselve. I find the linking of the words havoc and unselve downright apocalyptic. In the sound sense of the phrase, with its insistent repetitions, I hear the sound of the axe. 10 or 12, only 10 or 12 strokes of havoc, unselve. The destruction or unmaking of a grove of aspen trees, the unknowable consequences of the well-meaning violation of the natural world, a true vulnerability we cannot fathom, but perhaps it's the needle poised before the vulnerable eye. Hack and rack, hack and rack, hack and rack. The havoc, the unselving. Could it be too the unmaking of us along with the unselving, unmaking, cutting down of Hopkins' grove of beloved aspen trees? The final lines, the sweet, a special scene, rural scene, a rural scene, sweet, a special rural scene, seem somehow ephemeral and even fleeting in their very voicing. All right, thank you for watching and listening. If you found this interesting, please like and subscribe. This is the second in a series of videos on the poetry of Gerard Manley Hopkins.